Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take your sources, get right into the details, and bring you the core insights. Today, we're diving deep into something that, well, often gets tangled up in cultural views, but it's deeply rooted in the actual texts. The special, elevated status of the daughter, al-bint, in Islamic theology and law. Our mission, really, is to work through some heavyweight classical Sunni sources. We're talking Quranic exegesis, so tafsir, authentic Hadith collections, and centuries of legal thought, fiqh. And the main question we're tackling is this: how did Islam's foundational texts not just, give daughters rights, but actively flip the script? Turn it from being seen as almost a liability in pre-Islamic Arabia into this profound blessing, a ni'mah, and even more, a source of incredible spiritual reward, a Hasanah. We're going to unpack some very specific guarantees, theological and legal. You'll hear how raising a daughter well is directly linked to, well, guaranteed paradise, closeness to the Prophet himself, and this unique financial safety net built right into the law. It's quite something.
It really is, and understanding the scale of that shift is key. The sources show this wasn't just a minor tweak. It was a genuine socio-religious revolution. It went head-to-head with the, frankly, harsh and misogynistic practices of the Jahiliyyah, the pre-Islamic period of ignorance. By setting down specific legal duties and offering these huge spiritual incentives, the faith established the daughter's inherent value. It's both theological validation and, like you said, a clear path to major spiritual reward for those raising her. And just to be clear on sources for this deep dive, we've pulled together material from the foundations of Sunni legal thinking, the four big schools: Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali. So this ensures we're talking about principles grounded in the core text, not just, localized interpretations.
Okay, fantastic. Let's start that journey then, right at the beginning, because to really feel the impact of these Islamic rulings, we first need to understand the world they entered. What was that pre-Islamic reality? What made the birth of a daughter, for some fathers at least, such a difficult event?
Yeah.
Hashtag 1.1, the crisis of infanticide, want, and cultural shame.
Right. So the pre-Islamic social structure was heavily patriarchal and often, let's be honest, brutally practical. Daughters, generally speaking, didn't have much legal standing. In many tribes, they were completely cut out of inheritance or property rights. That was mostly for the men, the ones who could fight or protect the tribe. So the daughter was often seen as, a dependent, someone who couldn't contribute to defense or the main economic stuff.
And that vulnerability, that perceived lack of contribution, it led to this horrific practice of female infanticide, maybe not everywhere, but common enough to be a major issue, right? Driven by some pretty stark fears.
Exactly. The sources point to two main, deeply ingrained reasons. First, there was the straightforward economic burden. Raising someone seen as a non-contributor, especially when resources were scarce, like in a famine, that was a real concern. But the second fear, arguably, was even more powerful. It was the fear of disgrace, harm, and humiliation.
The honor culture. So the idea was if a daughter got captured by enemies or maybe married someone the family didn't approve of, that somehow reflected badly on all the male relatives, stained their honor.
Precisely. The sources explain it starkly. The daughter, tragically, was viewed as representing an infinite possibility for scandal. The man's honor was completely tied up with her conduct, her protection. So the act of wad, burying the baby girl alive, it was, for them, a terrible solution, but it was seen as a way to prevent potential future shame or ruin or poverty. A grim insurance policy, hashtag 1.2, Quranic intervention and denunciation.
Wow. Knowing that backdrop, that deep cultural anxiety, makes the Quran's intervention just incredibly forceful. It doesn't just ban the act, it goes right for the mindset behind it, starting with that father's inner turmoil.
Yes, exactly. Surah An-Nahl, verse 58, gives this really chilling, almost visceral description. It talks about the father hearing the news of a daughter's birth. His face becomes dark and he suppresses grief. The imagery is so strong that immediate switch from potential joy to visible misery, maybe even suppressed anger, it's all about the perceived social implication.
And then the next verse, 59, lays out that awful internal debate he has. Should he keep her, despite the disgrace he assumes she'll bring, or should he put it away into the dust? It's just this raw moment of moral crisis driven purely by what society thinks.
But the divine response is immediate, sharp, and completely condemns it. The verse ends by calling their decision-making process, whichever way they lean in that horrible debate, evil sa. And here's the crucial theological shift. The Quran reframes where the disgrace actually lies. It wasn't in the daughter herself. The real shame, the evil, was in the parent's choice, driven by these warped cultural values that put fragile social honor above a human life and divine command.
And this sin isn't just condemned in this life. It's tied directly to Judgment Day accountability.
That scene in Surah Takwir, verses 8 and 9, it's haunting. And when the female infant buried alive is questioned, for what sin she was killed.
That framing is just incredibly powerful. Analytically, it's the core of the revolution. The victim gets to ask the question. She demands justice directly from the one who killed her, right there on the day of resurrection. It forces this ultimate accountability for a life that society had deemed worthless. It elevates her life, her existence, to something demanding justice at the highest level. The legal and moral weight is immense.
I remember reading that the scholars didn't just limit this to, the literal act of burying alive. They saw a broader principle against harming female life, even unborn life.
Yes, that's a really important expansion. The core verse targets wad, the physical burial. But using other prophetic teachings and general principles about protecting life, scholars extended the moral weight of this prohibition. It grew to encompass what you might call hidden forms of infanticide. This brought in discussions about abortion, especially after the point where the soul is generally understood to enter the fetus, often cited around 4 months. The consensus leans towards seeing any deliberate termination after that point without a serious medical reason as falling under a similar ethical umbrella. It's about protecting that vulnerable life cycle right from its early stages. #tagged 1.3, affirming divine sovereignty and semantic worth.
So the Quran condemns the crime, but it also goes deeper, dismantling the whole underlying idea that having a daughter was somehow a defect or bad luck.
Exactly. To completely counter that cultural sense of deficiency, the Quran hammers home that having children, boy or girl, is purely about Allah's will, his sovereignty. Surah Ash-Shura, verses 49 and 50, makes this crystal clear. It says, he gives to whom he wills female children, and he gives to whom he wills males. Or he gives both males and females, and he makes barren whom he wills. And Ibn Kathir, the famous commentator, he breaks this down using examples. You have prophets given only daughters, like Lut, only sons, like Ibrahim, both, like Prophet Muhammad, or none at all. This completely destroys any superstitious idea that having daughters or only daughters means you're somehow out of favor with God. It's simply his choice, his gift.
Okay, that makes sense, divine will. But you mentioned commentators point out something subtle, even in the way the verse is phrased, the order of the words.
Ah, yes, this is fascinating. Linguistically, it's quite deliberate. In the Arabic, Allah mentions giving females anatham before he mentions giving males dukurah. Now, given how obsessed pre-Islamic culture was with sons, classical scholars universally saw this word order as a powerful intentional correction. By putting females first, the text gives us immediate, strong validation of their worth. It directly confronts that deep-seated bias. It basically makes it impossible to claim God somehow prefers sons.
Wow, that's subtle but powerful. A linguistic priority to counter a cultural one. Okay, this brings us to that famous idea often quoted, sons are a blessing, Nima, and daughters are good deeds, Hasanah. This needs unpacking because it sounds potentially tricky.
It absolutely does need careful unpacking because it underpins the whole spiritual reward system we're exploring. Let's be clear. Both sons and daughters are definitely blessings from God, no question. But the Arabic words used, nima and Hasanah, they carry different theological weights. Nima is like a general favor, a grace, something God gives you that requires gratitude, shukur. A son fits this, a blessing of continuity, perhaps support. Hasanah, though, that means a good deed. It's an action you perform that generates positive spiritual credit, if you like. So when the daughter is termed a Hasanah, it shifts the dynamic. It's not just receiving a gift, it's presented as an opportunity for the parent to invest, to do something good.
Okay, so why? Why is raising the daughter framed as this primary Hasanah, this major good deed, potentially even more spiritually weighted than raising a son?
The interpretation consistently ties it back to the historical context, because the daughter, historically and especially in that Jahiliyyah setting, required more from her caregivers. More sacrifice, perhaps more sensitive nurturing, definitely more protection from cultural hostility and potential harm. Basically, because she was often more vulnerable, the effort involved in raising her well, protecting her, educating her according to Islamic values, that effort was seen as greater. So the spiritual accounting reflects this. The immense reward, the Hasanah, for doing that job well is magnified. It surpasses the reward for the more standard blessing, the nima, of a son, precisely because fulfilling that duty required pushing back harder against negative cultural norms and investing more intense protective care. It rewards virtue over social pressure.
That's a really profound reframing. So the very things society might have seen as negatives, her vulnerability, her need for protection become the very reasons why the dedication needed to raise her well is such a direct path to earning significant spiritual reward.
Exactly. And if you look at the bigger picture in Islamic ethics, there's often this emphasis on rewarding investment in the vulnerable, the marginalized, or the task that demands greater moral strength. And this is where the Hadith literature comes in. It takes these concepts and makes them concrete, offering these really quite stunning explicit guarantees for parents who raise daughters with excellence and fairness.
Okay, let's pivot then. From the theological grounding to these incredible promises in the Hadith. If raising daughters well is such a major spiritual path, what specific rewards are actually on offer? What's guaranteed? Hashtag 2.1. The reward of unparalleled closeness.
Well, one of the ultimate goals, spiritually, is closeness to the Prophet Muhammad in the hereafter. And the sources directly link achieving this high honor to how one raises their daughters. There's a very famous hadith in Sahih Muslim, number 2631. It's considered highly authentic. Anas ibn Malik reports the Prophet saying, "Whoever cares for two girls until they reach maturity, then he and I will come together on the day of resurrection."
Okay, cares for. Let's break that down. It uses the word Allah. That's more than just putting food on the table, right?
Yeah.
What does Allah really cover, and what's the time frame?
Right. Allah is a very strong, comprehensive term. It definitely goes beyond just basic provision. It means full guardianship, material support, yes, but also moral guidance, spiritual upbringing, emotional care, protection, basically the whole package of raising a child well. And the duration is specified until they reach maturity, hatta tabluga. So this commitment, this comprehensive care, needs to continue until the daughter is grown, usually understood as until she marries and transitions to her husband's care, having been raised as a responsible, pious adult.
And the way the Prophet illustrated this reward, very visual, very memorable.
It really is. It makes the promise incredibly tangible. After saying those words, the Prophet specifically joined his index and middle fingers together, or maybe interlaced them. This physical gesture symbolizes the closeness, the qurb, the proximity the parent will have to him in paradise. It's an unparalleled level of honor, the kind usually associated with the absolute highest levels of piety and sacrifice. It confirms that this duty, done well, is a guaranteed ticket to that kind of spiritual eminence. Hashtag 2.2. Guarantee of protection in paradise.
So, amazing closeness to the Prophet.
Yeah.
But the Hadith go even further, promising actual protection from hellfire and guaranteed entry into paradise itself.
Yes, there's a very strong guarantee related to having 3 daughters, found in collections like Musnad, Ahmad, and Tirmidhi. The Prophet said, "Whoever has 3 daughters and he cares for them, he is merciful to them and he clothes them, then paradise is certainly required for him." That phrase, wajabat lahu al-jannah, is powerful. It means paradise becomes incumbent, obligatory, certainly required for that person. It's about as close to an absolute guarantee as you can get, conditioned only on fulfilling those core duties. Overall care, Allah-specific mercy, hahma, and provision, clothing here symbolizing all needs.
That's an astonishing promise. And it wasn't just limited to 3 daughters, was it?
No, exactly. The sources confirm that when someone asked the Prophet, "What about 2 daughters?" he replied, "Even 2." Which really reinforces the principle. The immense reward comes from the quality of the care and the mercy shown, not just the number.
And then there's that beautiful narration from Aisha, the Prophet's wife, that completely flips the pre-Islamic view on its head. She mentioned daughters being a test.
Yes, she related that if someone is tested, which can mean blessed, or tried, challenged with daughters, and treats them with Ihsan, which means kindness, excellence, doing good beautifully, then those daughters become a sitr, a screen or shield for him against the hellfire. This is the ultimate spiritual reversal. The daughter, who in Jahiliyyah might have been tragically seen as a source of potential shame or burden, is transformed by Islam into a literal shield protecting her parent from eternal punishment. The very act of raising her with excellence becomes a means of salvation. Hashtag 2.3, prerequisites for the highest reward, Ihsan and adl.
Okay, it's clear these huge rewards aren't automatic. They depend on fulfilling the duty properly. You mentioned Ihsan, excellence and kindness. And the other key principle is al-adl, justice, fairness.
Absolutely crucial. These rewards are strictly conditional on the quality of the upbringing. Al-adl, justice, is vital, and it works on multiple levels. It means being fair between daughters if you have more than one. But critically, it also means being just and equitable between daughters and sons if you have both. Fairness in giving gifts, showing affection, providing education, no unfair preference.
How does the fiqh, the law, handle that in practice, say, in a modern family?
Right.
Does adl mean identical treatment always, or is it more about equity? Like if one child needs braces and the other doesn't?
That's a great question. The scholars emphasize equity based on need, not necessarily identical treatment moment to moment. But the key is avoiding favoritism driven purely by preference or gender bias. So if one child gets a significant gift, say for graduation or marriage, the others should ideally receive something comparable when their time comes, or an equivalent benefit. If you fund university for one, you should offer the same opportunity to the others, son or daughter. The Prophet explicitly warned against favoring one child over others in gifts. He told a companion who had done so, "Fear Allah and be just among your children." So the intent behind the differential treatment matters hugely. Is it based on genuine need or biased preference? And beyond adult, the responsibility requires comprehensive upbringing, tarbiyah. It's not just about feeding and clothing them.
Right, tarbiyah. That sounds like it's about their whole development, their character.
Exactly. Tarbiyah is about holistic development, providing a solid Islamic education, teaching good manners, adab, instilling faith, iman, building moral strength and resilience. It's about equipping her to be a righteous, contributing member of society. And experts in this field often point out the successful Islamic upbringing of daughters has this ripple effect, this huge positive impact on society. Because when a daughter is raised with knowledge, wisdom, and strong moral character, she often becomes a righteous wife, a nurturing mother, and the first and most important teacher for the next generation. So investing in her development is really investing in the future health of the community. That parent's reward can continue long after they're gone through the good she does, a form of ongoing charity, sadaqah jariyah.
Okay, so we have the theological validation, the amazing spiritual promises. Now let's get practical. Let's look at the law, the fiqh. How did classical Islamic law take all this validation and translate it into real, enforceable, guaranteed rights for the daughter?
This is where the system locks in the protection. The legal framework, the fiqh, was designed to secure her dignity and her financial well-being throughout her life, directly pushing back against those jahila feels of her being a burden or a source of shame. Hashtag 3.1, unconditional financial maintenance. Naraka.
First up, financial support. The sources seem absolutely clear. Across all four main Sunni schools, the father has this unconditional religious and legal duty to provide full maintenance nafaka. It's not optional. It's an obligation.
That's the bedrock. Nafaka isn't just pocket money. It covers all necessities. Housing, food, clothing, healthcare, even education according to the family's means. It's a legal debt upon the father. And the crucial distinction here is the duration of this obligation, which is uniquely weighted for the daughter. For her, the father's duty to provide nafaka is mandatory until she gets married. This provides this incredible long-term financial security blanket. Compare that to a son. The father's obligation towards him usually ends when the son reaches maturity, is physically able to earn, or finishes his education and can support himself. The daughter's support continues regardless of her age or earning potential, right up until marriage shifts the responsibility to her husband.
So the law basically builds in this protection. She doesn't have to work for survival or depend on anyone else until she transitions to marital support. It tackles that old economic anxiety head-on.
Precisely. It systematically removes that pre-Islamic fear. She's legally protected as a valued dependent until she is financially secured through marriage. And even then, if, God forbid, she gets divorced or widowed, the obligation for nafaka actually reverts back to her father. Or if he's passed away, it falls to her closest male relatives, her mahram, who are financially able. It's designed as a perpetual safety net throughout her life.
And this holds true even if the parents separate, if the mother gets custody.
Absolutely. Even if the mother has custody, the Hasanah, the financial responsibility, the nafaka for the daughter, remains squarely and non-negotiably on the father. He cannot use withholding support as leverage. Her well-being is legally insulated from marital disputes. Hashtag 3.2. Mandatory and inalienable inheritance rights.
Okay, maintenance is huge. Then there's inheritance. This seems like one of the most radical changes from Jahiliyyah, where often only men who could fight inherited anything. Islam brought in fixed shares, furdia, for women.
Yes, these shares are mandated by the Quran, fixed by divine decree. They cannot be denied or negotiated away. For a daughter, if she's the only child, she gets 1/2, 12, of the net estate after debts and bequests. If there are 2 or more daughters and no sons, they collectively get 2/3 of the net estate shared equally among them. And crucially, this inheritance is hers alone. It's her personal wealth. She has zero obligation to spend it on her own upkeep or on her family. Her maintenance, remember, is still covered by her father or husband.
Now, this is often where criticism comes in, focusing on the fact that a daughter typically inherits half of what a son gets in the same position. How do we understand this? Is it just inequality, or is there a bigger picture in the fiqh?
That's a really common point of confusion, and it needs context. Yes, looking purely at the fixed shares, the son often gets double the daughter's portion. However, you absolutely have to look at the responsibilities attached to that inheritance. The legal structure places all the financial burdens, the takalif, almost entirely on the male heirs. When a son inherits, he immediately becomes legally responsible for the nafaka of his own wife, his children, and potentially other dependent female relatives like his sisters if they're unmarried and unsupported, or his mother or aunts if they have no other provider. The daughter, on the other hand, inherits her share purely as personal wealth, free and clear. She has no legal obligation to support anyone, not even herself, as that nafaka duty falls on the men responsible for her. So when you look at the whole financial ecosystem, her half share often represents greater disposable wealth and financial autonomy, while the son's double share comes heavily encumbered with legal financial duties towards others. It's framed as an equitable distribution based on responsibility, not necessarily identical shares.
That framing security versus responsibility is key. Okay, but what about the rest of the estate? After these fixed shares, Farida, are paid out, sometimes there's money left over. This gets into complex territory, right? The debate about rad return versus tasib residuary.
Exactly. This is a classic area of difference between the Sunni schools, what happens to the baqiya, the remainder. The doctrine of rad, or return, asks, if there are no designated male residuary heirs, adaba, like sons, fathers, brothers, uncles, etc., does that leftover portion go back to the primary fixed share heirs, like the daughters, or does it go elsewhere?
And the schools historically disagreed on this.
They did. The Hanafi and Hanbali schools generally accepted the principle of rad. So if there were only daughters and no close male relatives designated as adaba, the remainder of the estate would return to the daughters proportionally to their initial shares. This could significantly increase their total inheritance, sometimes even giving them the entire estate if there were no other primary heirs. It keeps the wealth concentrated within the immediate nuclear family.
And the Maliki and Shafi view, historically?
Historically, the Maliki and Shafi schools were more restrictive regarding rad in many common scenarios. They often adhered more strictly to the rules of tasib. If there was no qualifying male elba, the remainder might, depending on the specific situation and legal context, go to the Beit al-Mal, the public treasury, or potentially to more distant male relatives who wouldn't normally inherit otherwise. Their interpretation focused tightly on the definition of who qualifies as a residuary claimant.
But you mentioned things are shifting. Even within those schools, the modern trend is different.
Yes, this is really important for contemporary understanding. There's been a significant jurisprudential evolution. Across the Muslim world today, the overwhelming legal trend, often codified in modern personal status laws, even in countries traditionally following Maliki or Shafi fiqh, is to implement the principle of rad. The practical effect is to minimize or eliminate the role of the public treasury or very distant relatives inheriting, and instead prioritize the immediate family, especially the daughters. The legal momentum strongly favors maximizing the daughter's financial security and keeping family wealth within the core family unit. Hashtag 3.3. Personal and marital protections. And finally, beyond the financial, the law builds in layers of personal protection too.
Like the mahram relationship, the idea that she's permanently unmarriageable to her close male relatives like her father and brothers.
Exactly. That mahram status, clearly outlined in Surah An-Nisa verse 23, creates this zone of inviolable respect and security within the family. Her father and brothers aren't just relatives, they are her designated lifelong protectors, her guardians, qawamin, legally obligated to ensure her safety, her dignity, and even assist with her travel needs if required. It reinforces that lifelong familial bond and duty of care.
And maybe the most critical, personal protection, her say in who she marries.
Absolutely fundamental. Across the schools, a core legal principle is the daughter's right to consent to marriage. Her explicit approval, her free assent, is required for a marriage contract to be valid and lawful. Some nuances exist regarding the role of the guardian, wali, for a virgin daughter in some schools, but the principle that a marriage cannot be forced upon her against her will is central. This upholds her agency and dignity at one of the most crucial decision points in her life, protecting her from forced unions and affirming her right to choose her life partner. Hashtag tag conclusion.
This has been an incredibly rich, deep dive. We've really followed the thread, haven't we? From theology to the spiritual promises in Hadith, and right through to the nuts and bolts of the legal framework in fiqh. It paints a very different picture than common assumptions.
It really does. The sources consistently show the daughter isn't just, accommodated or tolerated. She's presented as this unique blessing, central to family stability and even individual salvation. We can really boil down her elevated status to those three key pillars we discussed. First, you have the theological validation. The Quran actively condemning the old prejudices, deliberately ordering the mention of females first, reframing her care as a high-value good deed, a Hasanah. It's a profound statement of her inherent worth, replacing cultural shame with divine honor.
Then second, the eschatological privilege.
Well,
Those explicit hadith promising guaranteed paradise, her being a shield from hellfire, that incredible image of closeness to the prophet. It positions caring for daughters with Ihsan as a top-tier path to spiritual success.
And third, the enduring legal security. The fiqh, creating this lifelong safety net. Mandatory nafaka until marriage, which reverts back if needed. Inalienable inheritance shares, farida, that are pure personal wealth, often boosted by rod in modern practice. Plus the personal protections of mahram status and consent in marriage. It's a comprehensive system aimed at securing her dignity and autonomy.
So the clear takeaway from the sources is that her status isn't just about rights. It's uniquely privileged, specifically because of the spiritual potential and the high degree of moral excellence that Ihsan and Al demanded from those who raise her.
And that leads us right to the final thought, the challenge, really, for you listening. We've explored this powerful divine framework, but it's so important, especially today, for Muslim communities everywhere to keep distinguishing between this Islamic ideal and those persistent cultural habits that lag behind. So much of the gender discrimination, we might still see, subtle disappointment at a girl's birth, maybe limiting her opportunities compared to a son. These things overwhelmingly come from those lingering pre-Islamic cultural echoes, the remnants of Jahiliyyah thinking, not from the sacred texts we've just explored. Achieving those incredible spiritual blessings we talked about, that requires parents actively putting Ihsan and Abel into practice, constantly challenging unfair assumptions. So the question to reflect on is, what modern cultural assumptions about gender, maybe assumptions rooted in old fears or habits rather than the divine guidance we've seen, might you need to examine and perhaps challenge in your own life or community, based on this framework that prioritizes justice and elevates the daughter status so profoundly?